One evening last week, my wife seemed to want to have a conversation. After dinner, we moved into the living room to talk where we could be more comfortable. Jim, that's my name. You're going to hear about this sooner or later, and you might as well hear it from me. That was an eyebrow-raising way of starting a conversation. Our sister-in-law Susanna told your brother today that she was going to take a week's vacation with a man who she works with. She says it's an exciting trip that she just can't pass up. So she wants him to give her a hall pass. I was stunned, although I was relieved that it wasn't my wife, telling me right to my face that she was going to run off and cheat with another man. Your brother told her that it was unacceptable, that he would not allow her to cheat on him like that. She gave him the usual rationalizations for how it would improve their marriage, how it wasn't really cheating, and that if he would just keep his little ego under control, this would be nothing more than a short break in their marriage, and she would return to be an even better wife to him. As soon as she mentioned my sister-in-law Susanna telling my brother to keep his little ego under control, I spaced out into a memory from years before. Before I met my wife when I was taking college classes and in a relationship with a woman who I thought would be the love of my life, my soulmate, my one and only. I'm Jim Handel, spelled just like the famous composer, but alas, not related. I was not trying for a regular degree in college. I was just taking classes that would help in my musical career. Nor was I trying to become a world-famous musician. I really didn't have some of the tools like large or very fast, flexible hands for piano. On the other hand, I was even then making my living as a musician. That meant a lot of different little jobs, and always looking for new things to do for the almighty dollar. There were two churches that I played for each Sunday. They held services at different times. One, I played traditional church music on an organ, and the other where I played on a keyboard with a Christian band that played up-to-date Christian rock. That was a lot of fun. I also accompanied choir practice at the more traditional church in the middle of the week. The Christian rock group rehearsed together on a different evening. I accompanied voice and instrumental students at the college. A lot of small things, making about $25 per hour, which was pretty good money for a musician, just 20 years old, who hadn't even finished a degree. I wasn't working 40 hours a week, but at my rate I could afford not to. But some of my biggest moneymakers were playing bassoon and making a circuit of 45-minute musical appearances at over 55-year-old adult communities and independent living facilities. I didn't charge a fee for those performances. I just took tips. I also sold CDs of the music that I performed as well as other pre-recorded sets of piano music. I had hundreds of pieces recorded in my home studio, both piano and synthesizer. I could sound like a solo piano or like an orchestra. Those CDs cost me about 50 cents to make, labels and cases included, and I sold them for $10. I created new ones for every time I made my circuit, usually 4 times a year. I had a group of followers who bought one of each of them when a new one was available. Enough about how I struggled to scratch a living in music. How did I meet the expected love of my life? It was at the college. I was playing bassoon with the orchestra. The piece that we were playing was an original composition by one of the music faculty, a piece that would be played once at the concert and most likely never again. But then I changed hats. I was playing the Grieg piano concerto for the orchestra to practice with. For the actual performance, they were bringing in a semi-well-known young pianist who had won one piano competition or another. Granted, I was playing with music, not from memory, but I was also accustomed to following the conductor since I normally played with the orchestra. The concert was a success, and as I predicted, the original piece by Dr. Theory was played for the first, and as far as I know, last time. It wasn't really that bad. It was just not an especially memorable work. A stronger melody would have helped. But the fun was when the guest pianist played the Grieg. His playing was exquisite, but he was often a little out of sync with the orchestra. He just needed more experience playing along with a conductor, not just playing on his own. It wasn't a disaster, but people in the audience could hear it. Oddly, the conductor had asked me to hang around backstage with my copy of the concerto during the performance. He claimed that he wanted me to write a critique of the performance. I suspected that he was worried that our guest performer might collapse and that I would be there to step in. Everything went well enough, though. I was also invited to the post-performance party held at the college president's mansion. That was when Jane, the first chair violinist, also known as the concert mistress, approached me. To be honest, I didn't think that Jane even knew who I was. I don't think that she had looked my way twice. First, she was a beautiful redhead with blue eyes and a trim figure, and she had never needed my services as an accompanist because her well-known violin teacher would usually play for her when she needed an accompanist. Second, I was in awe of her skill with her violin. I didn't usually attend student concerts, but I did hers. She was destined for one of the major orchestras. Perhaps not as a famous soloist, but good enough to play in the first chair section. "We would have been better off if you had played instead of the doofus who they brought in." I was a bit startled by her observation. "Well, he needs more experience. He's probably played by himself for years, and accommodating yourself to a large group isn't easy for someone who hasn't done it before. That may explain why he is playing with our college orchestra and not one of the major symphony orchestras to get a little seasoning." She smiled. "That's very generous of you to say, but the school could have saved some money and gotten a better concert by having you play." Then she laughed. We ended up talking together for the rest of the party, despite several men from the orchestra who approached us trying to horn in and get her attention. And after things broke up, we made our way to one of the 24-hour cafes that were in the college neighborhood. From then onward, Jane and I were a couple, an exclusive couple. While I don't harp on it, we had an active and varied intimate life. I had enough experience to know that Jane was a sexual woman, open and desirous, and who enjoyed our joinings as much as I did. We were so much more. We became a duet. Jane joined with me playing for my circuit of performances, and we recorded our duets in my studio. We split the money, which meant, to be honest, I was getting a smaller share as a percent, but with my beautiful redhead violinist, we were making more in total, both in tips and sales of CDs. We were also getting requests to play for events and parties that I hadn't been doing before. We were a team in every way. We would be making a bundle on social media these days. Of course, we both played and worked independently as well. Sometimes we would both be playing with professional orchestras. Other times I might be playing and Jane not, and vice versa. My epiphany came one evening when my beloved Jane asked me to meet her at a pizza place we often frequented. After we had eaten, she took both of my hands in hers and began the sales pitch. She wasn't breaking up with me, she told me. She just needed some time to explore other people. It would do us both good, and we would be better than ever. I agreed, didn't I? I suspect that in her mind, this meant that she would try out other men, while I sat at home pining for her and not exploring other women. I argued my points back. I didn't think that any good would come from her going off and dating other people, and to my mind, that would end our relationship. If we weren't going to be exclusive, then there was no longer an us, just a me and you. At some point during our discussion, meaning her telling me what she was going to do, inevitably came the line, "Don't let your delicate little ego force us to split up. I'll come back and still be there for you." As soon as she told me not to let my little ego interfere with her plan for the future, I went silent. Then I excused myself and left. Thank God we weren't living together, so I could go back to my place by myself. When I thought about what she had said, my internal alarm bells were going off to high heaven. Keep my little ego in check? Indeed. What is a person's ego? It is their self-image, the way that they see themselves, their skills, their strengths, their very being. In my case, I saw myself for what I was, an adequate musician with more hustle than most of my contemporaries. A decent-looking guy who had never had a lack of women in my life. Most of the time, like Jane, women would initially approach me. I never pursued them. Pursuing a woman was almost always a losing strategy. I was making a decent living and seemed to have enough social graces to pass in any company. It raised the question for me, Why was I supposed to accept Jane damaging and diminishing my ego in order that she could enhance hers? My ego was a self-defense mechanism. My ego was the voice that let me argue for my point of view when I thought I was right. Heck, I sometimes argued with the orchestra's conductor when I thought he was getting the tempo wrong, or when he thought that the bassoon was supposed to come in, when, by my count, we still had a measure of rest. My ego let me take a stand on things both big and small. But my ego was also sturdy enough that if I was corrected and had been mistaken, I accepted the correction and moved on. By the time I went to bed that night, Jane had tried to call a couple of times, but I just let them go to the answering machine without listening to them. I always kept the volume on the machine low and often completely off, so when calls came in during times when I was giving lessons, they wouldn't interrupt. I didn't know if she had indeed followed through and gone out with whoever she had in mind. I had, by that time, lost any curiosity about it. Maybe it was telling that I was more worried about who I would get to replace her when I started my next round of performances at the old folks' communities. I had about 3 weeks to find her replacement and get together for enough rehearsals to put on a satisfactory performance. In addition, to really make money, I needed to have time to put together music on my digital audio workstation and turn out some CDs. By the next morning, I had my solutions ready. I knew a flutist who was, like me, always scrambling for money. She was a great flute player and very quick to pick up new music. On top of that, the flute is a C-based instrument just like the violin, and played in roughly the same range. I wouldn't even have to adjust or rearrange the music we were going to play. The flute player I had in mind was named Monique, and she answered the phone when I called. At least she knew who I was. I told her that I had a potential music deal to make if she was interested. She was. We met at lunch at a small cafe not far from the music building of the college. All the music majors knew where it was. We got there a bit before the lunch rush. I explained what I was doing and why I wanted her to play with me. We would do 2 to 3 little recitals a week at the places on my list, which meant about 8 weeks playing the same music, then a couple of weeks off, and then repeating the cycle with a different repertoire. I told her what I expected to do as far as money went for the performances, and then offered her a share of the CD sales. We would split the money at the venue, and she would get a share of the CD purchases. Not an even split this time. I was doing most of the non-musical work, setting up our little soirees, recording, engineering, producing the CDs, and arranging the music we would play. I was entitled to a larger share. I mentioned that were often little side gigs that we might get if we could schedule the time. Then she turned to me. "Isn't Jane going to be pissed that I'm playing with you and not her?" I pretended to think about it. "Not really. We've played together for a while, but I think it is time for a change-up. You know, a chance to give the audience a different sound. Keep from getting boring." I reminded her about how it seemed like rock bands were always splitting up, bringing in new players, changing the band's sound. We were just doing the same sort of thing. I'm not sure she swallowed the story completely, but it seemed to satisfy her. I had already arranged 17 new pieces to record, so we recorded them, but with a flute instead of a violin. I did the limited sound engineering that the music needed and got the CDs ready for sale. Monique was very quick and hardly needed any practice to sound wonderful with her flute. Somehow, she could also flirt with the audience as she played, and everyone loved her bubbly personality. In case you were wondering, there was nothing between me and Monique. She had a boyfriend, a nice guy who played trumpet, who tried to always be at the venues we played. He just loved hearing her play. In fact, later, I arranged a number of pieces to play with trumpet, sometimes trumpet with organ, or harpsichord piano, or even orchestra, and I hired him to play for performances. He and I made 2 CDs together, and I gave him the same deal I had with Monique. Nevertheless, I'm back playing at my regular list of locations. I think that it was after the 2nd or 3rd performance, when we were wrapping up and putting our instruments and equipment away, that I looked up to see Jane standing there. "I see it didn't take you long to replace me," she said. her voice not quite loudly angry but irritated. "Hello, Jane," I replied, not really answering her statement. I expected that was rhetorical in any case. "Did you enjoy the performance?" I asked. "Yes, the performance was fine, but," she replied. "Okay. Now, if you want to talk more, let's go someplace other than the lobby of an over-55 retirement community," I laughingly stated. "How about the coffee place across the street?" "Fine," she said with that tone that women reserve, that meant it clearly wasn't fine. We both drove to the local coffee place. I'd been there before, and thank God it was a standalone place, not one of the 10,000 locations of the big brand. I liked their coffee better anyway. The beans were freshly roasted there on site. I ordered a medium roast coffee, black, for myself, and paid for Jane's frou-frou chai latte as well, knowing that it would most likely be the last time I ever bought her anything. "So," I asked once we had seated ourselves, "what was it you were saying?" "I said that you hadn't wasted any time replacing me since you walked off in the middle of our last conversation." "Well, you know that substituting a flute for a violin isn't really difficult. Both instruments are in the key of C, and the ranges are very close." "That was not what I was talking about, and you know it. I mean that you've ghosted me and found a new girlfriend. And you did it so quickly that I wonder if you weren't seeing her even before you walked out on me." "Do we have a little bit of projection there?" I laughed again. "Monique is not my girlfriend. In fact, if you had watched as she was leaving, you would have seen her boyfriend's arm around her shoulder as they passed, not more than 10 feet away from you. So that leaves my substituting a flute for your violin to consider. I must apologize, though. I should have emailed or texted you to let you know I was changing up to have a different sound for a while. I just didn't want to have an argument with you. I will continue to pay you your share on the remaining CDs that you played on as I sell them. Just for your information, there aren't many of them left. Monique isn't getting nearly as much per CD because I realized how much of the process of turning live music into a CD I wasn't being paid for." I could see that Jane was getting red in the face as I explained things to her. "I don't care about the money, I care about us," she exclaimed. "I'm not sure what you mean. I told you at the time that if you started going out with other men, that would end the US and it would become you and me. I'm not sure if it would make a difference, but have you gone out with the man or men who you were so keen on seeing?" She didn't reply, but her eyes, looking at the table and not at me, gave me my answer. "Okay, so why are we talking at all?" I asked her, truly curious. "Well, we should still be seeing each other. Just because I need to satisfy my curiosity doesn't mean we have to split up. I know your ego is probably hurt because I didn't want to be completely exclusive, but that doesn't mean that we've really lost anything in our relationship." I imagine that if my eyes could bulge out like a cartoon character, they would have at her delusional little speech. "So, today you were counting on the forgiveness is easier to get than permission sort of ploy." I chuckled a little at my own wit. I sat there quiet for a moment while I took another long sip of my coffee and considered my reply. Jane sat there quiet as well, knowing that her admission to dating other men was honest but not favorable. "After you laid your position down to me, I left and went back to my place to consider just what you were saying. I know that much of what you were saying involved intentions. At the end of the day, though, it isn't intentions, but actions that speak the truth. I think that economists call that revealed preferences. I consulted with my ego, that you think so poorly of, and by the next morning, I had come to some conclusions. The problem wasn't that my ego was so delicate or too sensitive. The problem was your ego was overblown and arrogant. I think that the word for it is egotistical. Well, that and narcissistic. Your expectation was that you could get away with anything because you had me cowed. Alas, I must admit that I was in part at fault. I had spoiled you. I had offered you more than you had earned of my affection, as well as the fruits of my musical insights and labor. Now, I am the first to admit that you are an excellent violinist, but you were always replaceable. There are at least a dozen other fiddle players in the music department who could fill your shoes. The music we were playing just wasn't that difficult. You are aware of why I chose you to play with. You were not just a fine violinist, but a beautiful woman who I thought was a potential spouse, a soulmate. But you sitting me down and treating me like a child who would accept your behavior without complaint was over the top. My ego told me something else. I am just a better person than you. I'm more loyal, I'm kinder, I'm more considerate, and I'm just as good a musician. Certainly more versatile. I concluded that I was better off without you than with you. You are beautiful on the outside, inside, maybe not so much. But there's a lot of fish in the sea, you know. As Kipling once wrote, a woman is only a woman, but a good cigar is a smoke. Lord, I love that poem. She cringed a little hearing Kipling's line. In fact, you might be surprised at some of the women who have approached me since we went our separate ways. It might interest you to know that your violin teacher, the fabulous Madam Kim, approached me to ask me if she could play with me and record some of her favorite pieces for violin. We may do it when I have some time. Jane was sitting there with tears in her eyes as I related my thoughts to her. But when I mentioned playing with Madam Kim, she openly burst out crying. I got up and sat next to her and hugged her until she calmed down. Please understand that I'm still fond of you, and if I need another violinist, you will be first on my list, I lied to her. We will always be friendly, and I will always be civil to you, but we will never be a romantic couple again. Shortly after that, we left the coffee shop and parted our ways. Jane shows up from time to time on my social media. She went to the East Coast, where she was hired by one of the big city symphony orchestras, and she teaches violin, both at one of the local universities and private lessons. So far as I can tell, she has never married. I met my future wife at an event where I was playing together with a cellist, a man. My wife is not a musician, she's an accountant, but she enjoys my music and has supported my music career. Speaking of which, although I still play a lot of gigs, I have been making most of my money from sales of my recordings on the internet and selling my published arrangements of duets for different combinations of instruments. Back in the present, I vowed to speak to my brother about trusting his ego and letting Suzanne know just where she stood, as opposed to where she thought she stood. My brother Robert and his wife Suzanne lived in my old house, which I had acquired while I was in college, and making my money by playing whenever I could. It wasn't anything to brag about when I bought it, but with Robert's help, he worked in construction and knew how to do everything from electrical to plumbing to drywall and painting. We remodeled the kitchen, the baths, and modernized the house inside and out. I rented it to him at my cost for the mortgage, utilities, insurance, and sundry. The result was that Suzanne had no claim on the house. They had no children yet. They had been considering them when she came home with her "I'm spending a week with a guy from work" turned out to be her boss. What a cliché. They had some money in the bank, but not enough to worry about. Splitting would be easy, cheap, and fast. I explained to him why his ego was his friend. Then we downloaded divorce papers off the web. It could be cheap if she didn't contest it, and why should she? When he presented the divorce papers to her before she had taken her proposed week of vacation with her boss, she went crazy. Robert explained how after consulting with his ego, he had decided that he was a better person than she was, and that it would be less painful to split now than to wait until they had kids, bought their own place, and all of the other connections that come from marriage got any deeper and more complex. She really didn't like the "lots of fish in the sea" or "a good cigar is a smoke" lines either. No accounting for women, I guess. Once she calmed down, Suzanne begged him not to dump her. She claimed that nothing had really happened yet between her and her boss, and that the trip, her brain fart, as she called it, was off. She quit her job and found something else just as good, if not better. Robert wasn't sure that things hadn't gone further than she was admitting. but he didn't push the issue. She wasn't happy about the post-nup that Robert had her sign, but she knew it was part of the price she paid for staying together with my brother. I was the one who suggested that as well. They didn't have a lot, so the post-nup mainly made divorce easy and quick if either one of them cheated on the other. Not long after their almost marriage-ending period, Robert took Suzanne on a trip that was more exciting and exotic than the one her boss had offered her. Will they make it? I don't know. I probably wouldn't have given her a second chance myself. That is up to Robert. But I can tell you, he keeps his eyes open and demands a lot more from Suzanne than he did before he checked in with his ego. Like I said before, my ego is my friend. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.